I hadn't seen my natural hair in over 20 years. As I casually wove this statement into a conversation with friends in preparation for this talk, they seemed, well, at least to me, to be somewhat taken aback by this comment. The truth is, if it hadn't been for this thing called a global pandemic, I'd probably still have absolutely no idea what my natural hair looked like. You see, as a moderator, an MC, and a host, I need to be able to show up being professional. And I really did not have time to be faffing about with hair. Honestly, people with naturally coily hair have a day dedicated to dealing with their hair. And I didn't have that kind of time on my hands. Well, at least that was until the pandemic put a real spanner in the works for me. See, when it first started, it wasn't too much of a problem. But then the hair drama began. Now, let me not assume that you all understand black hair. So before we get started, let me give you a really quick lesson in black hair. In its natural state, black hair can shrink up to 75% in length. It particularly loves to do this when presented with water, be that rain, a swim, or say, sweat from a workout. Basically, it shrinks. So here I am, in a global pandemic, no access to a hairdresser, working out daily with the roots of my natural hair beginning to show. This means I have two textures of hair. The roots, coily, highly sensitive to water. The ends, chemically straightened, dead straight. Now, before you start to think that you understand how to deal with this, because it started off okay. Actually, the first few weeks were fine, but as the weeks turned into months, I had a serious drama on my hands. And before you start to think, surely, Lovelda, one of these would have solved it. Not in my experience, my friends. See, what would happen is I would spend, no word of a lie, I'll come back to the timing, but I would spend an immense amount of time with my hair straighteners on the roots of my naturally coily hair. And I would straighten that until it looked exactly like the chemically straightened ends. And it would be absolutely perfect until I did a workout or had a bath. Remember? Naturally coily hair, highly sensitive to water. And then what would happen? So basically, I'd be in a really great state. I'd do a workout. I would sweat. The roots would then shrink, and I would end up looking, well, something like this. Needless to say, this was creating a tremendous amount of stress. It didn't matter what I did. It was taking me, no word of a lie, 2 hours to get ready for presentations and video calls. And my business, friends, is based on presentations and video calls. Needless to say, I had a disaster on my hands. I couldn't cope. There was no way I was going to get through the pandemic spending 2 hours a day trying to look presentable. I couldn't handle it anymore. Now, thankfully, so I did what anybody would do in this sort of situation. I called Mum. Yes, like a child with literally any problem in the world, I called my mother. Now, she tried to talk me through my natural hair journey on the phone. Frankly, I was having none of it. I was beyond it. It was a disaster. It was messing with my business. I couldn't take it anymore. We were in one of those COVID bubbles, thank goodness, and she agreed to braid my hair. Braids last 6 to 8 weeks, and so thankfully it kind of eased me through lockdown with my sanity intact. So you would have thought that as soon as the hairdressers opened, I would have been one of the first people begging for one of those very limited hair appointments. But I wasn't. You see, I'd become kind of curious. I mean, I hadn't seen my natural hair in over 20 years. Maybe some of you haven't seen your natural hair. Perhaps it's dyed, or you straighten it so regularly that you just don't know what it looks like anymore. And I figured the pandemic had given me this really cool opportunity to see how far I could take this hair thing. Worst case scenario, I thought, if I don't like it, I could always just go back to chemically straightening my hair. After all, Mum's braids were doing the trick. What it meant was, with the couple of hours that I was gaining from not having to straighten my hair, it now put me in the position where I was able to be presentable for the video and online presentations that were coming to me through my speakers bureaus. I was able to grow my consulting and coaching business in the comfort that I could show up presentably for my clients. In fact, I remember one of these specific engagements. It was near the beginning of lockdown. It was one of those at-home filming gigs for one of my corporate clients. Basically, I got to film for them from home. And as I set up to film for the engagement, I remember having a thought. Maybe I should tell them my hair's braided. See, they'd only ever seen footage of me with chemically straightened hair, and so maybe this braided look was not going to be acceptable. Before I could pick up the phone to make that call, another thought dropped in. Lovelda, why should it matter? Why should it matter that you've changed your hairstyle? I mean, people change their hairstyles all the time. Why do you seem to think that your hairstyle is going to have an impact on your income? Perhaps I thought this because I'd heard of other people with natural hair like mine who had been discriminated against for showing up with their natural hair. Perhaps it's because I rarely see people in positions of power and really successful with natural hair like mine. Maybe it was because of the media. Or maybe it's because for centuries we've created social contracts that dictate how we choose to show up in order to fit in. If you haven't already guessed, this talk, not about hair. See, whether it's gender, sexuality, hair, pay, you fill in the gaps. What I came to see that day is that there are social contracts that hold us back. See, the social contract I co-signed, something like this. How I look will influence my success in business. Or, more specifically put, how my hair looks will influence my success in business. Or, if I was being really honest, and I was to state it bluntly, you know, amongst friends, it would be black hair in its natural state isn't professional. Black hair in its natural state isn't professional. That was my contract. What is yours? You see, social contracts, I repeat, are not about hair. Social contracts are the unwritten agreements that are so subtly woven into the fabric of our society that they've become a social norm that we just live into. I don't know if anybody was judging me for my hair. See, if you'd asked me why my hair was chemically straightened, I'd have told you it's because it's easy to deal with. And I would have been speaking my truth. Until the day I thought I needed to ask permission for my hairstyle, a hairstyle that is part of my culture, I realized it wasn't the truth. The truth is, I was ashamed of my natural hair. Deeper than that, I didn't think that I could have the success that I desire in life and business with my natural hair. We co-sign these social contracts for two reasons. One, shame. The other, a really deep, burning desire to fit in and to feel valid. Like I said, I don't know if anybody was judging me for my hair. Don't know. I mean, I never showed up with my natural hair for them to judge me. And in some ways, it really doesn't matter. What actually irritates me more is that I spent 30 years of my life co-signing on a social agreement that blocks the very diversity, equity, and inclusion that I stand so strongly for. See, whether it's an illness or a disability that we just choose not to tell anybody about, whether it's an accent we do so well to try and hide and conceal, whether it's an inherent truth about who we are that we simply don't tell people about, whether it's how we act differently in one group of friends versus another group of friends, or a cultural identity that we hide or pare back. When you choose to act differently, to adapt your voice, your behavior, your appearance, in order to fit in, be accepted, be seen as valid, I invite you to ask yourself, am I co-signing on a social contract? Am I putting my seal of approval for others like me to be seen as invisible? We could argue, society made me do it. I mean, let's face it, we could say that social contracts exist due to the media. After all, it's taken incredible external events for the media to really start to reflect diversity in the way that they present. We could argue that it's due to the movies who've created all these social norms and stereotypes that have become so difficult to shake off. But I would say it is much deeper than that. See, our society has been built on the social contracts that we now see playing out today. See, slaves were only actually freed in the US in 1863. In 1870, that's when women in the UK, it was okay for them to hold contracts and have property in their own right. Colonialism only ended in 1960. And it's been only 21 years since the Netherlands became the first country to legalize marriage equity. Today's subtle social contracts are the scars of yesterday's painful social norms. It takes courage to take your name off a social contract. Contracts which were created by our ancestors in order to navigate their painful realities. Contracts which now today hold us back in a world which has become so much more open to change and progress. It's true that we must find the courage to take our signatures off social contracts which we don't subscribe to pave the way to new social norms. And I would also argue, though, as much as that is true, it is also true that expecting a society, a community, a gender, or a race which were historically victimized and excluded to within a mere few generations to have healed and let go of the very systems they put in place to navigate life is delusional at best. Contracts have 2 signing parties at least. I know I have been guilty of putting my name on social contracts I don't subscribe to. There was a time, honestly, where I used to really heavily negotiate the fees of women. These are the same women I want to stand in their value. Where do you see your signature? Is it in your silence, where you turn a blind eye? Is it in your failure to educate yourself? Is it perhaps in those subtle behaviors that cause others pain? In the same way, I invite you to have a look at where you've been co-signing on social contracts. I now also invite you to look at the social contracts you've been handing out. Where and when have you not created the most welcoming environment for all? Because, let's face it, it's more effort. It is more effort to increase the pay of everybody in the team when only one person asks for a pay rise. It is more effort to reflect, to think about people with physical and mental disabilities in the creations of our products and services. It is more effort to think about our entire client base and reflect them in our marketing material so that people can see themselves in what we sell. It's inconvenient to do the work. The work that requires us to critically evaluate where we have been putting our signatures on social contracts that we don't subscribe to, nor do we agree with. And I would argue that if we are to live in a world where we don't need diversity, equity, and inclusion agendas in order to coexist, I would say that we must individually identify, acknowledge, and choose to remove our signatures from the social contracts that hold us back. Thank you.